Evening, sir. License and registration. Keep your hands on the wheel.
You don't remember me, do you?
Why should I remember you, sir?
You were wearing the same uniform at my funeral, but different badge number.
Evan? What? How are you even here?
Because justice is yet to be served.
Dispatch, run the driver's name again.
Officer, that subject was pronounced dead.
A patrol officer runs a license plate on a Thursday night in October. The system pings back clean. No warrants, no flags. He walks up to the driver's side window, asks for registration, and when the man turns his head toward the dome light, the officer stops breathing. Because that face, he knows that face. He gave the eulogy at its funeral. 7 years ago, Officer Caleb Rourke stood in front of a closed casket and read prepared remarks about a man named Evan Holloway. He watched the casket lower into the ground. He signed the incident report that declared the death. He attended the reception afterward and shook hands with grieving family members who thanked him for being there that night. And now that man is sitting in a Honda Accord with expired registration, looking back at him through a rearview mirror. This isn't a case of mistaken identity. This isn't a doppelganger. This is the same scar above the left eyebrow. The same slight lazy eye that compensation made you forget about after 5 minutes of conversation. The same voice that says, "Evening, officer," in a tone that suggests he knows exactly what's happening right now. Caleb Rourke has been a cop for 19 years. He's seen overdoses, shootings, car wrecks that left vehicles wrapped around trees like aluminum foil. He's talked people off ledges. He's performed CPR on children. He doesn't rattle easily. But right now, standing on the shoulder of County Road 12 with his flashlight aimed at a dead man's driver's license, he's rattling. The Bodycam footage from that night has been reviewed by 3 separate agencies. The timestamp is verified. The audio is clear. The video shows exactly what happened when Officer Caleb Rourke pulled over a 2009 Honda Accord for a broken taillight and came face to face with a man he personally identified in a morgue 7 years prior. The footage is 17 minutes long. By minute 3, Caleb has already broken protocol twice. By minute 8, he's violated department policy. By minute 12, he's made a decision that will either end his career or expose something that was supposed to stay buried. And by the end of the video, the question isn't whether Evan Holloway is alive. It's whether anyone was supposed to know. Before we go further, thank you for being here. These stories take time to tell correctly, and the fact that you're still watching means you're the kind of person who values that. If you're watching from somewhere specific, drop it in the comments. If this is your first time here, consider subscribing. And if you've been watching for a while without subscribing, genuine question: what's the hesitation? These stories don't work without you. All right, let's go back. Caleb Rourke grew up in Timber Falls, a town of 11,000 people in Central Oregon, where everyone knows everyone, and anonymity is a luxury reserved for tourists passing through on their way to somewhere else. He became a cop because his father was a cop, and his grandfather before that. It wasn't a calling, it was a continuation. He's not the officer who writes tickets to meet a quota. He's not the officer who escalates situations to assert authority. He's the one who shows up to domestic calls and spends 40 minutes talking to both parties separately, trying to de-escalate before anyone goes to jail. He's the one who knows which kids are shoplifting because they're bored, and which ones are doing it because there's no food at home. He's steady, reliable. The kind of officer other officers call when they need someone who won't overcomplicate things. But 7 years ago, Caleb was called to a scene that didn't allow for steady. It was mid-March, just after midnight. A 911 call came in reporting a violent altercation outside a bar called the Jack Pine. The caller said a man was on the ground, not moving, and that another man had fled the scene in a pickup truck. Caleb arrived first. The man on the ground was Evan Holloway, 32 years old, local contractor, father of a 6-year-old daughter named Sophie. He had severe head trauma. Blood pooled under his skull. His breathing was shallow and irregular. Paramedics arrived 4 minutes later. They stabilized him enough to transport. Caleb followed the ambulance to the hospital and waited in the hallway while doctors worked. At 2:47 a.m., a doctor came out and told him Evan Holloway was dead. The attending physician cited blunt force trauma, brain hemorrhage, and cardiac arrest. Caleb was asked to identify the body for the record. He did. He looked at Evan's face, noted the scar above the eyebrow, the birthmark on the neck, the tattoo on the left forearm that read, "Sophie," in cursive. He signed the paperwork. 3 days later, he attended the funeral. The casket was closed. The family requested it. Caleb stood in the back and listened to the service. Afterward, he spoke briefly to Evan's sister, who thanked him for being there the night it happened. She said it meant something that he stayed. 2 weeks later, the case was closed. The man who fled the scene was arrested, charged with manslaughter, and sentenced to 12 years. Evan Holloway's death was entered into the record. The file was sealed. And for 7 years, that was the end of it. Until October 17th, 10:42 p.m., County Road 12. Caleb is working a late shift. It's quiet. Most nights in Timber Falls are. He's driving a standard patrol loop, checking in on closed businesses, making sure no one's parked where they shouldn't be. He spots a Honda Accord with a broken taillight and decides to pull it over. Routine, low priority, the kind of stop that ends with a warning and a handshake. He runs the plate, comes back to a name he doesn't recognize, Marcus Lyle. No warrants, no history. He pulls in behind the car, activates his lights, and approaches the driver's side. The window rolls down. The man inside turns his head, and Caleb's brain tries to process two incompatible facts at the same time. This is Evan Holloway. Evan Holloway is dead. He doesn't say anything at first. His flashlight is still aimed at the man's face. The man looks back at him calmly, hands on the steering wheel, exactly where they're supposed to be. And then Caleb says it. Not a question, not an accusation, just a name. Evan? The man nods. Yeah. Hi, Caleb. Let me pause here, because this is the moment where most people would assume they're losing their mind. Caleb doesn't scream. He doesn't draw his weapon. He doesn't call for backup. He stands there, flashlight in hand, trying to reconcile what he's seeing with what he knows to be true. He remembers the morgue. He remembers the body. He remembers the coldness of the metal table, the paperwork, the signature. And yet, the man in the car knows his name. The man in the car has the same scar, the same lazy eye, the same voice. Caleb's hand moves to his radio, but he doesn't press the button. Instead, he says, "Step out of the car." Evan complies, slowly. No sudden movements. He gets out, closes the door, and stands with his hands visible. Caleb's body cam captures all of it. The angle, the lighting, the expression on Evan's face, which is not fear, not panic, not confusion. It's resignation. Like he's been waiting for this moment. Caleb asks him to confirm his name. Evan does. Caleb asks him to confirm his date of birth. Evan does. Caleb asks him about the scar above his eyebrow. Evan tells him it happened when he was 12, fell off a bike, needed 6 stitches. Caleb asks about Sophie. Evan's face changes then, just slightly, just enough. She turned 13 last month. Caleb knows that's correct. He knows because he remembers the obituary listing her as 6 years old at the time of her father's death. He asks, "What happened that night?" Evan looks at him for a long moment. Then he says, "I didn't die, Caleb. Someone made sure it looked like I did." This is where the story shifts, because up until this point, you could write this off as confusion, as trauma, as coincidence. But Evan doesn't claim amnesia. He doesn't claim resurrection. He claims substitution. He tells Caleb that the body in the morgue wasn't his, that the man who was declared dead that night was someone else, that the paperwork was altered, that the identification was manipulated. Caleb asks who did it. Evan says, "Someone you trust." There's a name that comes up in every major case in Timber Falls, a name that appears on reports, witness statements, evidence logs. a name that's been with the department for 23 years. Deputy Lane Whitaker. Lane was Caleb's training officer when he first joined the force. Lane was the one who taught him how to de-escalate, how to read a scene, how to write a report that holds up in court. Lane was also the officer who responded to the scene at the Jackpine that night. Lane was the one who coordinated with the hospital. Lane was the one who filed the initial incident report. And according to Evan, Lane was the one who orchestrated the entire thing. Evan explains it in pieces, not all at once, not dramatically, just in flat, factual statements that Caleb has to work to absorb. The man who died that night was a transient, someone with no ID, no family, no one looking for him. Lane found him dead in a motel room 2 days before the incident at the Jackpine. Overdose, unreported. Lane saw an opportunity. Evan had been working on a construction project that uncovered financial irregularities involving county contracts. Payments to shell companies, falsified invoices, kickbacks routed through multiple accounts. Lane was connected to those accounts. Evan started asking questions. Lane needed him to stop. But killing him outright would have triggered an investigation. Too many people knew Evan. Too many people would ask questions. So Lane staged it differently.
He arranged for Evan to be at the Jackpine that night. He arranged for a fight. He arranged for the transient's body to be transported to the hospital in Evan's place. The head trauma was real. The injuries were real. But the man who died wasn't Evan Holloway. It was someone no one would miss. Caleb listens to all of this standing on the side of the road, with his body cam still recording. He asks the obvious question, "Why didn't you come forward?" Evan's answer is simple. "Because Lane told me if I did, Sophie would disappear next." That's the leverage. That's the reason Evan stayed dead for 7 years. That's the reason he changed his name, moved 2 counties over, worked under the table, avoided anything that would put him back in the system. He didn't resurface because he wanted to. He resurfaced because Lane is about to do it again. Evan tells Caleb there's another man asking questions, another contractor who stumbled onto the same financial trail. Lane has been watching him, following him, setting up the pieces. Evan doesn't know the man's name, but he knows the pattern. He knows how it starts, and he knows how it ends. He came back because he couldn't let it happen again. This is the moment where Caleb has to decide. He could arrest Evan right now, bring him in, report everything, let the system handle it. But if he does that, the report goes through Lane first. And if Lane gets wind that Evan's alive, everything disappears. The evidence, the trail, the second man Lane's been watching. Or Caleb could do something else, something that violates every rule he's been trained to follow. He could let Evan go, temporarily, long enough to build a case, long enough to gather proof, long enough to make sure that when he moves, it's airtight. The body cam footage shows Caleb standing there for 37 seconds without saying anything. Then he tells Evan to get back in the car. Evan looks at him, confused. Caleb says, "Fix your taillight, Drive carefully." And he walks back to his patrol car.
This isn't heroism. This isn't vigilante justice. This is a calculated risk made by a man who knows that the system only works if the people inside it are clean. And right now, Caleb doesn't know if it is. Over the next 4 days, Caleb does something he's never done before. He investigates quietly. He pulls old case files without logging the requests. He reviews evidence logs from 7 years ago. He checks hospital records, morgue intake forms, autopsy reports. And he finds gaps. The autopsy was signed off by a medical examiner who retired 6 months later and moved out of state. The toxicology report was never filed. The dental records used for identification came from a clinic that burned down 2 years after Evan's supposed death. None of it is proof, but all of it is suspicious. Caleb contacts the state medical examiner's office. He doesn't mention Evan, he doesn't mention Lane. He frames it as a routine audit of cold cases. They agree to review the file. 3 days later, they call him back. The DNA sample on file doesn't match Evan Holloway's medical records. That's when Caleb knows Evan was telling the truth. The body buried under Evan's name isn't Evan. which means Evan Holloway was never dead, which means someone falsified a death certificate, manipulated an autopsy, and buried an unidentified man under someone else's name. And the only person with access to every step of that process was Lane Whitaker. Caleb brings the information to the district attorney's office, not the local one. He drives 2 hours to the state capitol and walks into an office that has no connection to Timber Falls. He hands over everything: the case file, the timeline, the discrepancies, the name. The DA listens, takes notes, asks questions. At the end of the meeting, she tells him they'll open an investigation, but it has to be handled carefully. If Lane suspects anything, evidence will vanish, witnesses will recant, the case will collapse. Caleb agrees to stay quiet. For 2 weeks, nothing happens. Then, on a Tuesday morning, federal agents arrive in Timber Falls. Lane Whitaker is arrested at 9:15 a.m. while sitting at his desk in the sheriff's department. He doesn't resist. He doesn't ask questions. He just stands up, lets them cuff him, and walks out in silence. The charges are federal: evidence tampering, filing false reports, obstruction of justice. But the investigation doesn't stop there. They search his home, his office, his financial records. They find shell companies, offshore accounts, payments from construction firms that won county contracts under suspicious circumstances. They find emails detailing payoffs, threats, instructions to bury evidence. And they find a file on a man named Aaron Pritchard, a contractor who was asking questions about the same financial trail Evan had uncovered years earlier. Aaron Pritchard had been reported missing 2 days before Lane's arrest. A search team is dispatched. They find Aaron alive, locked in a storage unit on the outskirts of town. He's dehydrated, confused, but alive. Lane had been planning to stage another death, another substitution, another burial. But this time, he didn't get the chance. Evan Holloway is officially declared alive on November 3rd. The court vacates his death certificate. His records are restored, his identity is returned. But 7 years don't just disappear. His daughter is 13 now. She barely remembers him. His sister spent 7 years mourning. His friends moved on. Evan gets his life back, but it's not the same life. Caleb Rourke is cleared of any wrongdoing. The department reviews his actions and determines that his decision to investigate quietly rather than report immediately prevented Lane from destroying evidence and potentially harming Aaron Pritchard. But the review also notes that Caleb violated protocol, that he acted outside the chain of command, that he put his career at risk. Caleb doesn't disagree. He also doesn't regret it. Lane Whitaker is convicted on 12 federal charges. He's sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. During sentencing, the judge reads a statement that includes the names of both Evan Holloway and Aaron Pritchard. She says, "You didn't just manipulate the system, you weaponized it. You turned the trust people place in law enforcement into a tool for personal gain. And you did it knowing that the people you hurt had no recourse because you were the one they were supposed to turn to for help." Lane doesn't speak, doesn't apologize, doesn't look at anyone. He's led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. And that's the last time Caleb Rourke sees him. Timber Falls struggles to process what happened. Lane was a fixture in the community. He coached Little League. He volunteered at the food bank. He was the officer people called when they needed help. And all of it was a cover. The town doesn't know what to do with that information, so they do what small towns do. They move forward, quietly, carefully, without talking about it too much. But the questions remain. How many other cases did Lane manipulate? How many other reports were altered? How many other people were silenced? The State Attorney General's office opens a broader investigation. They review every case Lane was involved in over his 23-year career. They find inconsistencies in 6 other cases, not as severe as Evans, but enough to raise doubt, enough to reopen investigations, enough to ask whether the system failed in ways no one noticed. Evan rebuilds his life slowly. He reconnects with his daughter. He finds work under his real name. He starts therapy. He doesn't give interviews. He doesn't write a book. He doesn't try to profit from what happened to him. He just lives. And that, in itself, is a victory. Caleb continues working patrol. He's offered a promotion after Lane's conviction. He turns it down.
He doesn't want to move up. He doesn't want to manage people. He wants to stay where he is, on the road, responding to calls, doing the work. Because that's where the truth shows up. Not in meetings, not in reports, but in moments, in decisions made on the side of the road at 10:42 p.m., when you have to choose between what you're supposed to do and what's right. So here's the question. If you were Caleb Rourke and you pulled over a man you buried 7 years ago, what would you do? Would you call it in immediately, follow protocol, trust the system, or would you take the risk? Would you believe the man sitting in front of you, even when everything in your training tells you not to? Would you investigate quietly, knowing that if you're wrong, your career is over? Would you act on instinct, on evidence that doesn't exist yet, on faith that the truth will reveal itself if you give it time? Because that's what Caleb did. He didn't have proof. He didn't have backup. He didn't have certainty. He had a dead man sitting in a Honda Accord with a broken taillight telling him a story that shouldn't be possible. And he chose to believe it. Not because it was easy, but because the alternative, ignoring it, reporting it, letting the system handle it, meant risking another life. If you're still here, thank you. Stories like this don't get told quickly. They require patience. They require attention. And the fact that you've made it this far means you're the kind of person who values that. If you found this worth your time, consider subscribing. If you're already subscribed, thank you. And if you've been watching for a while without subscribing, honest question. What's stopping you? Leave a comment. Let me know where you're watching from. Let me know what you think. Because these stories only matter if people are willing to sit with them. Truth doesn't always rise on its own. Sometimes it gets buried. Sometimes it gets replaced. Sometimes it gets declared dead and sealed in a file no one's supposed to open again. But every now and then, it resurfaces. Not because the system worked, but because one person decided to look closer. Evan Holloway was dead for 7 years, until a broken taillight brought him back. And when Officer Caleb Rourke saw his face in the dome light that night, he had a choice. Believe the paperwork, or believe the man. He chose the man, and that decision saved 2 lives. Not because Caleb was a hero, but because he was willing to ask the one question most people avoid. What if everything I was told is wrong? That's the lesson. Not that the system is broken, but that the system only works when the people inside it are willing to question it. Lane Whitaker spent 23 years manipulating that system. He used his position, his access, his authority to bury the truth. And he almost got away with it. The only reason he didn't is because one officer stood on the side of a road and chose to investigate instead of arrest. Chose doubt over certainty. Chose risk over safety. Chose the possibility of being wrong over the comfort of being sure. So the next time someone tells you something is impossible, remember Evan Holloway. Remember that he was legally dead for 7 years. Remember that his death certificate was signed. His body was buried. His case was closed. And remember that none of it was true. Because sometimes the biggest lies aren't the ones people tell. They're the ones the system accepts as fact. And the only way to expose them is to be willing to stand in front of a man everyone says is dead and ask him to prove otherwise. Caleb did that. Evan answered. And the truth, delayed by 7 years, finally came out. Not because it was easy, but because someone cared enough to ask.